Welcome to the Cut for Time podcast. This is Pastor Clay coming to you before the episode, before Eric and I jump into the conversation to just touch bases about the audio issues again that we had this week. About at the 13-minute mark of the episode, my microphone died, but we just kept going with the recording. Eric's mic picked up the audio. It might be a little bit hard to hear, but we hope that you enjoy this week's conversation based on my sermon from Sunday and based on the idea on our mental health and Jesus being the one to restore and to heal.
I was thinking about the message, or the scripture. The first thing that came to my mind, and this might be as simple as I think it might be in my head, but anyway, so these two blind guys.
Yep.
And they're essentially completely shunned, like you said, worse than lepers in society.
Yeah.
Like, how did they know about Jesus, and how did they get there?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question that,
Probably no one has the answer to.
Right, yeah, exactly. I mean, because Matthew doesn't tell us, and neither of the other blind people that Jesus interacts with, he just happened upon them.
Right.
Like,
but it specifically says they searched him out. And they can't see him, so you feel like someone had to have led them to him.
Absolutely.
But I was just thinking about that. Like, you want to talk about how powerful God is, like, to be able to take these people that aren't really welcomed at all.
Right, yeah. And no one's going to, there had to have been an act of kindness somewhere that didn't get recorded in the Gospels that led these two, because the word about Jesus was buzzing by that point in time. Like, Jesus was really shaking some stuff up and ruffling some feathers with the healings he was doing. And we're going to talk more about that next week because he raises someone from the dead. But like, Jesus is ruffling feathers and really getting people riled up, and they're starting to talk about Jesus. The buzz is building. And so they, at some point in time, heard that, like I said on Sunday, that Jesus was proclaiming the recovery of sight to the blind. And they're like, hey, wait, that's us. We need to get to this Jesus guy. And I'm sure that they asked they would have had to. They'd have to ask everybody, like, where can I see, where can I find this Jesus person? How can I interact with this Jesus person from this disadvantageous spot that I just exist in?
Right.
Yeah.
So one thing I've always struggled with, like, how did word spreads really easily today with technology?
Right.
How did that get around?
Right.
Because, it had to just be word of mouth.
Yeah.
But how did you know where he was? How did you know? Was it essentially because there was just always a mass of people following him around that you could go find the crowd and likely Jesus is there?
Right. Yeah. Because it was the 12 disciples. There was a set of women that are sometimes amorphously defined as, the women that followed Jesus. Mary Magdalene, sometimes Mary, the mother of Jesus. There are other women that were involved in the gospel story, and their level of involvement isn't as spoken, but yet, I think that by and large, the crowd, because Jesus's travel patterns weren't necessarily predictable. Like in the Gospel of Luke, it says, that Jesus set his face on Jerusalem and prepared to make the journey to Jerusalem. And if you look at a map of Israel and Jesus travels, it was north and south and north and south and north and south and over there for a while, then coming back over here and north and south and then to Jerusalem. Like, it wasn't just Jesus set his face on Jerusalem and then he went to Jerusalem. It was Jesus set his face on Jerusalem and then did a bunch of stuff. And then when it was at its fever pitch, went to Jerusalem, and that's when everything.
So it was like he wanted to go gather as many people as he could.
Exactly.
And take them all to Jerusalem.
Right, yeah.
Not just
Yep.
he was going.
Yep.
It's really what we're doing today.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's our goal.
Yeah.
Is to grab as many people as we can and take them.
Yep.
So the thing that stuck out to me the most was, Jesus touches their eyes and says, do you believe that I can do this? And that just struck me in a way that's the approach we need to take today.
Yeah.
Like, and I know that's the essence of your message, but that really stuck with me. Like, Do we believe that Jesus can fix the division that we have? Do we believe
Right.
that Jesus can help us through the coronavirus?
Right.
And if we would just say yes and just believe it
Right.
and stop putting our trust in other things or earthly things,
Mm-hmm.
how much better could this go?
Right, absolutely. So especially looking at this from a mental health standpoint, where like we're talking about how this pandemic, no matter what spectrum of response we're in, our mental health has been damaged. And if we really truly believe that Jesus can heal us and Jesus can put it back right and Jesus can, for us to really dig in and believe that, it would change our whole perception of this. You're absolutely right.
So why can't we? What holds us back from that?
Right.
From your perspective, what do you see as what's holding back society from doing that?
I think that the advantage of the blind guys in Scripture and the crowds that followed and saw what happened, and saw the difference. I think that there's an intangibility to that. That it's hard to believe in what you don't see, but that's what our faith entirely is. Is believing in this character that we believe existed and others don't. That this Jesus really existed. We have there is evidence out there for the existence of a person named Jesus at that time, but then it's taking that next step and saying, okay, if this Jesus existed, who was he, and what was his role in that day? Was he just a crazy person that, because there were other traveling messiahs that thought that they were wonderful and they were put to death by the Romans because that's what the Romans did. And, but Jesus was different. Jesus didn't stay dead. If you believe that, I think that there's a level of separation where we just can't grasp it. And so we just don't. And I also go back to what we talked about a couple weeks ago with, leprosy being so widely defined. And now because we've progressed, we've grown in our knowledge of what leprosy is and what it isn't. And these things that they considered leprous weren't actual leprosy. I think that part of the hardship of believing is just that there have been accepted other explanations of what happened that aren't faith-based, that aren't, that don't have that element of, but yeah, we could be wrong. Like, we don't believe that we are, but we could be. There has to be a level of faith there and a level of trust there in something bigger than we are. And I think that some people see that we have evolved or learned enough to explain away what was inexplicable in the day of Jesus. And so, there's this perception out there that science is antithetical to faith, and that just is not the case. I mean,
it supports it, if anything.
Right.
I mean, because there's things that we still don't understand. I mean,
oh, yeah.
And there's so much evidence. I mean, we've talked about this. There's so much evidence of that time. All these ancient people that we believe, that whatever they wrote at the time,
right? And
we have like hardly any copies of it. But we don't believe.
Right. Yeah, we have a hard time accepting belief in Jesus, where there is, there are eyewitnesses that saw him. Like, depending on which gospel you read, he appears to the 12, and he appears to a large number of people. And the Apostle Paul says that he appeared to, around 500 people, and then last to him.
Right.
There are eyewitnesses of this Jesus person that was crucified very publicly because that's how the Romans did things, and then showed himself to be alive to a number of people before his ascension.
And I feel like if he hadn't done that, if that step didn't happen where he appeared to people afterwards, it'd be a lot harder.
Yeah,
I totally agree with that.
Yep.
But because of that,
yeah,
it's hard for me to explain it away.
Yeah,
like you can't really do it. And if the idea of the Bible is based on an eyewitness account of what happened, especially in the New Testament.
Yep, absolutely.
So if you believe every eyewitness account that's ever been written, how do you not believe that one? Like the idea of the Bible is it's true, and if so,
right.
I mean, it's hard to explain it away.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
It reminds me of I took a class in seminary that was an intensive on the Gospel of Luke, and the Gospel of Luke opens up with Luke saying to Theophilus, which just means lover of God. So it could have been an actual person named Theophilus or just a person that loves God, which could be, all of us. And it says that he went and talked to eyewitnesses. Like the reason why Luke has different stories, like the reason why Luke has such a long birth narrative is because one of the people he talked to was Mary, the mother of Jesus. Like the reason why we know that Mary treasured these things in her heart, as it says in the Gospel of Luke, is because Luke talked to Mary and she said, "Oh yeah, I treasured that in my heart." And he wrote it down. And then he put it in a gospel, and then, through time and transmission and by the power of the Holy Spirit, we have those words. We have those stories. We have those. My preaching professor in seminary said we have those mom stories
Right.
that only moms tell. And that birth narrative is pure mom story. Of any story in the gospel, it's those mom stories that we get in his gospel.
Sure.
Yeah. That seem undeniable. And like Luke wants so badly to ground everything in, historical record. Like we know that Herod was the ruler at the time. Like we know these historical facts line up with the Gospel of Luke, for the most part. And he wanted there to be definitive proof in his Gospel. And I believe that there is.
Yeah. So back to mental health.
Yeah. So often we put up the mask of I'm fine when we're not really fine. And it's just easier that way sometimes, and it's just a way of not having to deal with exactly how broken we are.
Just listening to the song on the radio. I'm fine, oh, I'm fine, yeah, I'm fine, oh, I'm fine, I'm not, I'm broken, that song. Continue, I've got other thoughts, but go ahead.
Good deal. Yeah, so I was listening to her sermon, and she just went on and on about how things are broken and things that are damaged. I mean, look, if you look at the suicide rate among young people, it is skyrocketing. If you look at the suicide rate among older people, it has skyrocketed. If you look at alcohol sales, it has skyrocketed. If you look at other vices that are helping us numb the pain of what's going on, those things have skyrocketed, but yet we claim and yet we cry and yet we just, methinks we doth protest too much towards Shakespeare, but we say I'm fine. Like even half the things I say, like, today was not a good day. Today was not a good day, but I will still say I'm fine because it's just easier than dealing with the fact that today was hard.
Right.
So.
But I struggle with the same thing. I'm so darn arrogant. I don't want people to feel bad for me. Right. I don't want people to feel, because I know that, I think part of it is we know deep down that they're dealing with something too. So we don't feel like we want to burden someone else with our problems.
Of course, right.
But I think what we need to realize is, they're going through things too. So they would probably be supportive.
Exactly.
And be someone, could be someone that could help us through whatever. And maybe they're not. Maybe they're going to blow you off or whatever.
Right, yeah,
but we need to be willing to open up and have that conversation with people.
For sure, absolutely. I mean, like the blind guys in Scripture, like they had to rely on others to get to where they needed to go. Like for them to encounter, like we talked about earlier, for them to encounter Jesus took them being willing to say, "I'm not fine. I know who can make me fine again, I think and I hope, but I'm not fine."
Right.
And finding people that would point them in the right direction so that they could happen upon Jesus and say to him, "Have mercy on us." And have him say to them, "Do you believe that I can do this?" And then say, "Yes, we do," and then receive their sight. I mean, it took being willing to break open about what wasn't okay. And the challenge that Corey went on to go make in her sermon, which I really appreciated, was that we as the church have to be the place where it is okay to not be okay. I mean, it's scriptural, and not just this story, but I think of Galatians 6, runs through my head a lot. But Galatians 6 verse 2 says to bear one another's burdens, because we're all going, and he doesn't say this part's me talking, we're all going through something. And our And if we're not, we're going to at some point in time. And so we bear one another's burdens so that when we go through something that is burdensome to us, others will bear with us too.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to be that. It has to be. That's the only way that we're going to lead to healing. And removing the mask of I'm fine and dealing with what really isn't fine.
Mm-hmm.
So, in a group of people that we love and trust called this church. It's called, not this church, but called the church.
Mm-hmm. But the church has to change. I mean, like you said, the church has to change its mentality. The church can't. Mm-hmm. We have to be more welcoming.
Right.
We have to be able to let those people in that we may not necessarily agree with, may not necessarily get along with, but knowing that they need help too, and we're not any better than they are.
Yes.
And
yep. It's an old cliche that got thrown around in my college classes a lot when I was taking a theology degree at USF, but like the church is not a museum for the saints, it is a hospital for the sick.
mm-hmm.
And like we are dealing with sickness. Like mental health is a sickness thing. Like we are dealing with those that are hurting, and we are dealing with those that are damaged, and we are dealing with those that don't know how else to, where they're coming to the point or the end of themselves, and we need to be a place of compassion and a place that says, if you need to break down for a little bit, we got you.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you were singing a song and it hits you, it's okay. It's okay.
Yep.
When I was back in my previous appointment, we were doing a community worship service, and we sang a song that meant a lot to our family, and I was not okay during it. And I had someone come to my office the next day and say, hey, crying during church really sends the wrong message. And I said, okay, who are you? Because I'd been in town for a month and a half at that point, and this song, it was just a song that we used to sing with the praise band in Brookie. In the first church I served, my wife was on praise team, and like this song meant a lot to us, and we were missing our friends, and the message of that song so conveys the grace of Jesus Christ to us that I was not okay for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then to have someone come to my office that I had not met yet and have him say that to me, that's not what this is about. Like we, the church, should be the place. Like we should be, without question, the place where people can be okay not being okay.
Wow. I had a very similar experience. So for both of my grandparents' funerals, the choir sang, and we sang an arrangement of "Here I Am, Lord." Ooh. And there's a solo at the end of it that my amazing, wonderful, beautiful wife, choir director had me sing the solo at the end, and I could never make it through. And at the time, that was kind of hard for me. To me, I felt like I failed, and I failed my grandparents. But the more I think about it, that made it extra special.
Right.
Because it shows how much that my grandparents meant to me.
Absolutely.
And it was okay.
Yeah.
It was okay to not be able to make it through the end of that song. Mm-hmm. And they were such big supporters of this church and me in my faith that it will always stick with me that I didn't make it through that solo. And they died 3-4 months apart. And so it was really, now it was really neat. At the time, it was really hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the more I think about it, I wasn't meant to make it through the end of that song.
Right.
And it was really powerful for me to be able to sing that.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, for sure.
But yeah, it is okay that we can struggle with things.
Yeah. Yep. It's okay to be doing a unison prayer and just sitting in absolute silence because we just cannot do the words that day.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we're the church. That's why there's someone next to us that can do that.
Mm-hmm.
That can say those words for us. And that will have come to pass that person can't say the words that day, but I can. And that just has to be who we are. That has to be in the fabric. And I see that here, don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not speaking about idealistic things that don't exist, I see that here, and I've seen that in other places like that. But that's what the church should strive for all of the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I've seen the opposite here. I mean, to be completely honest, I've seen the opposite here, and that's what I want to work on is being able to be that church that people want to come to, and always feel welcome.
Right.
You know, we're getting some families in here, and we've heard, some good feedback on that, but I feel like we can do a lot more.
Sure. Sure.
And Jesus is what we need right now.
Yes. Yes.
And I keep coming back to that. Continuing to put our hope in other things just isn't going to work. I see it more and more all the time.
Absolutely.
And we can't do it ourselves.
No.
We absolutely can't.
No.
So for you, I mean, I feel like you, in my mind, you should have a support team like the church, but you also kind of need kind of a more personal support team. And who is that for you?
Yeah. So who that is for me is a couple of different people. I mean, obviously, first and foremost, who that is for me is my wife.
Mm-hmm.
She gets to deal with me when I am not very dealable with,
Mm-hmm.
to put it that way. She has to, if I've had a bad day, like today's not been a good day, and it just meant the world to me that after she was done with school, she called me and just said, "Do you want to talk about it, or are you not ready yet?" And I was ready.
Mm-hmm.
We talked. We kind of talked it through. That meant the world to me today. That
Sure.
made just every difference, because today has not been a good day,
Mm-hmm.
and it's okay to name that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we're here. But who else that is for me is I am a part of a very special group of clergy. Jeff Lathrop is one of my dear friends. He serves at Grand Forks Wesley, and then Carl Kroger had served in Piedmont but moved to Bismarck McCabe when I moved to Canton. And those two guys, we talk almost every single day.
Mm-hmm.
We are constant support for one another. We bounce ideas off of each other. Like Jeff's right now in the middle of the ordination process,
Mm-hmm.
and he's trying to decide what sermon to send to the Lord Ordained Ministry to be considered for ordination. And like he sent the video links to us. Like, I watched his sermon from a couple weeks ago to today, and first of all, he's a good preacher, and so it was really easy to watch. But
Mm-hmm.
to just say, hey, this is a good sermon, and this is the reason why I would consider that for ordination. Like he entrusted that conversation with us.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was a big deal, and so those guys are really the ones that I really find myself leaning on recently. My best friend from seminary is a guy named Chad, and Chad is not in ministry right now, and not in pastoral ministry. He's doing his own thing right now, but he is also still one of those people that I know when things get weird that I can call.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier this summer, when I was still in Burke, it happened that a young man in our community decided to not be alive anymore, and caused an accident. And the other person is doing much better now, but for a while he was not. It was not okay. But this young man died, and it's one of those things that they try to prepare you for in seminary, but I was not at
Mm-hmm.
all ready at all for this to happen. And my first phone call was Chad, and I just said, I don't know what to do. He can provide such a different perspective,
Mm-hmm.
but his input and his influence on my life is absolutely invaluable,
Mm-hmm.
even to this day. So those are some of the people for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how would you answer that question, Aaron?
Honestly, it's my wife.
Yeah.
We talk about everything, anything under the sun. And I'm just kind of might sound like I'm tooting my own horn or something, but I'm just kind of a happy-go-lucky guy.
Sure.
I'm really good at letting things just kind of roll off my shoulders and not dwell on things too much and don't let things get me down. But when they do, when things bother me, I just go straight to her.
Right.
And she and I are able to talk through whatever needs to be talked through. And
Nice.
that's always been how it is for us. I mean,
Yeah, it's huge.
it's been, what is it? Almost 9 years of marital bliss. So,
There
mm-hmm. But yeah, that's who I go to all the time.
Sure.
All the time. But I really struggle sharing my feelings with anyone outside of my wife.
Yeah.
That's always been hard for me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but I
Yeah.
tend to just keep things to myself if
Yeah.
they're bothering me.
That's
Except,
right.
but for the most part, I don't typically dwell on things.
Mm-hmm.
I guess God has blessed me
Yeah.
with the ability to do that because I
That's
know it's
awesome.
not easy it's not that way for most.
That's true. That's definitely true.
But yeah, so it's always been my wife. Back to your story though on that kid from your previous appointment.
Yeah.
As a church, how do we handle that? Something when something like that comes up, and
Yeah.
he just makes that decision. Like, what's the church's role in that?
Yeah. It's unfortunately something that I've been through twice now.
Ugh.
And both times, what's been very important for the church to do is to, in certain denominations, there is a perception that that is an unforgivable sin. Part of the church's job is to correct that.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what I hold to be theologically true. When you look at the heart and the nature of God, that is not who God is. I mean, Judas Iscariot is one of the most famous suicides in all of history. Like, after he betrays Jesus, he cannot live with what he's done, and so he decides not to live anymore. There has to be room for grace in that story. There has to be room for redemption in that story. I mean, there just has to be.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, then what's the point?
Right.
What's the point of the resurrection of Jesus Christ and life abundant that's been promised? What's the point?
Mm-hmm.
So I think part of the role of the church is to mourn alongside of the family, because that's a big deal. And then part of the role of the church is to be the presence of grace when others are not,
Mm-hmm.
and to remind them that this one decision that this person made is not the totality of their existence, and to, again, be that space where it's okay to not be okay.
Mm-hmm.
To be that space. Like, I spent a lot of time after this young man passed away. I spent a lot of time with his grandma, who was a member of the church, and they were there pretty often too. This whole family, and just spending time with her and letting her be however she needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
If she needed to be mad because it didn't make sense, then she could be mad. It is letting her be heartbroken because it's a heartbreaking thing. I think that we need to, the church, I think the role of the church in this is to really be that safe haven, to really be that sanctuary where, it's okay to not be okay, and to name and claim that, and to model that for people so that they get it when they're going through having their heart ripped out
Mm-hmm.
of their chest.
Right.
To know that there is a place and that there is a group of people that, regardless of anything else, any other thing that would happen to divide us, this is the place where it doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. But okay, so for you, like when you go through some of these things that we've been talking about,
Yeah.
like how do you get through those things?
Yeah. Well, it's leaning on those people, like I talked about earlier. It's leaning on friends in ministry that have been through similar things, and just saying, "Hey, I don't know how to handle this. What did you all do?"
Mm-hmm.
And taking advice, and not just replicating what they did, but like really looking, okay, this is what you did. How do I translate that into how I do ministry? And it has been at times being on the verge of seeking professional counseling and
Mm-hmm.
professional help.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's an okay step to take.
Yeah. Now that we've kind of dug ourselves into a hole, and where's our hope in all of this? When we go back to Matthew, like where is our hope in the story that you shared? We've got to be, otherwise we're stuck.
Right.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think the hope is found in the fact that these two blind men, despite what Jesus told them, because the blind men are told by Jesus at the end of the story, hey, don't tell anybody this.
Mm-hmm.
And they go and tell everybody this because, they're healing, like the leprosy thing, like, whatever spots or whatever things they had going on, like that might not have been as visual.
Mm-hmm.
The servant, like we never even see him in the story. Like we don't know that would have been noticeable, but not to anyone that cared because the servants were so low on the rung of things.
Mm-hmm.
But like here, the crowd saw these blind men. Like they would have known who they were, and the crowd saw these blind men come and approach Jesus, and then they saw these blind men not be blind anymore.
Right.
Like they don't have to guide every step of their path anymore. They don't have to. They're not asking for help all of the time, and just the actual, the actual physical change of being not able to see and then able to see would have been absolutely unmistakable. And so they had to say something.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't shy away from the fact that they were blind and they were broken and they were damaged by that. And now things have been set right again because of Jesus. And so when we are going through these hard times, whatever we do to improve our position, whether that is seeking professional help, whether that is talking to a friend, whether that is just a heavy dose of prayer, which is a huge part of this, people will see the change in us.
Mm-hmm.
People will see the difference between being not okay and being okay, and being for real okay and not fake okay. And, we will have a similar story to proclaim. And the challenge and the hope is that we have the opportunity to do that.
So where are we headed next week with this sermon series?
The story of Jairus' daughter being dead, and Jesus telling her to wake up, and her rising, and him telling the crowds that she was just asleep, and naming and claiming the fact that was a pretty creative thing that Jesus had to do, and our level of creativity in this pandemic has been sincerely damaged. That our energy for doing things has been just shot by the pandemic. Like early in the pandemic, everyone was like, "Oh, I'm going to learn how to do a new skill or a new hobby. I'm going to learn how to bake bread."
Mm-hmm.
No one is doing that. The story I'm going to tell at the start of the sermon is that I took a BuzzFeed quiz a couple days ago that I found, and it was about the pandemic hobbies. And the only thing that has grown that we're still doing is watching Netflix.
No way.
Yeah. I know, crazy, right?
Yeah.
The constant change and the constant shifting and the constant need to figure things out has led to a death of our creativity, to the damage and brokenness of our creativity. And that's, Jesus has created, like, we serve Jesus, the one who through the Word of God created the world. Like, we serve a very creative Jesus, and we have lost that. And so we need to. So the challenge will be, what are those creative outlets for us, and how do we then pursue them, and regain our imagination, and regain our creativity, and regain just the whimsical side of life that has died in the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be kind of where we go.
Well, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, join us again next week on Sunday for the message. Otherwise, join us back here for the next Cut for Time podcast. Thanks again.